Evelyn, my attorney, stated, his hands folded over a thick file folder on the mahogany table. "You are facing 10 years for federal wire fraud." David sat frozen across from me. The color left his face, leaving a pale, sickly gray. His hands trembled over a stack of printed banking records. He looked like a man watching the floor collapse beneath his feet. I did not blink. I just smiled. If you are listening to Pan of Vengeance today, drop your age in the comments because I want to know how long it takes most people to spot a parasite. I am 38, and it took me 6 years to realize my marriage was an elaborate heist. To understand how a self-proclaimed provider found himself staring down a federal indictment, you have to rewind exactly 6 months. It started at Rare Steakhouse right off the Capitol Square in Madison, Wisconsin. The air in the restaurant smelled of seared ribeye and melted butter. Low jazz played over the speakers, masking the hushed conversations of politicians and executives. I sat at a corner booth, swirling a $40 glass of Pinot Noir I had not taken a sip of. Across the table, David held court. He flagged down the waiter with a sharp snap of his fingers, a habit that always made my back teeth grind. "We will take the seafood tower to start," David told the young man, "and keep the tab open." Honestly, with the amount of cash I am funneling into local breweries these days, a little Napa Valley Cabernet is a drop in the bucket. He leaned back, adjusting the knot of his silk tie, basking in the glow of his own perceived wealth. Next to him sat his mother, Patricia, wearing the expensive cashmere wrap I bought her for Christmas. Beside her, his younger sister, Jessica, tapped her thumbs rapidly across her smartphone screen, oblivious to anything not glowing. As a medical software sales director for one of the largest tech firms in the state, my commission checks funded this exact moment. The cashmere, the seafood towers, the illusion that David was a kingmaker, making a modest salary as a mid-level marketing manager. I played my part. I kept quiet and let him swipe the card that drew directly from my account. During a lull in the conversation, I cleared my throat. "I toured the memory care facility in Door County today," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "My mother's dementia is progressing. She forgot how to use her own stove yesterday. They have a spot opening up next month, but the entry deposit is steep. We need to talk about shifting some of our monthly budget to cover her care." The table went dead silent. The jazz music suddenly felt too loud. David slowly lowered his heavy silver fork. It clinked against the fine china. He looked at me, his jaw setting into a rigid line. The charming host vanished, replaced by the cold, entitled man he kept reserved for our private moments. "Your parents? Your problem," David declared. His voice carried just enough edge to slice through the restaurant hum. He picked up his linen napkin and dabbed the corner of his mouth. "Your money is yours, Ariana. My money is mine." The air in our booth grew thick. I looked at Patricia. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, a faint, undeniable smirk playing on her lips. She approved of putting me in my place. Beside her, Jessica did not even look up. She just double-tapped a photo on her screen, unbothered, as if my mother's fading mind was a minor inconvenience interrupting her dinner. Nobody defended me. Nobody even blinked. Any other wife might have cried. Any other woman might have raised her voice, caused a scene, or begged for an ounce of empathy from the man she vowed to spend her life with. I felt something else entirely. The tightness in my chest, a familiar knot I had carried for 6 years of marriage, dissolved. In its place came a quiet, icy clarity. It washed over me like a frozen lake breeze. He sat there so pleased with his own logic, believing he had just protected his lifestyle. He did not realize the fatal error he had just made. He had just handed me the exact spoken permission I needed to dismantle his world. "Okay," I said, placing my wine glass down. I met his gaze and offered him a warm, serene smile. "If that is the rule, that is the rule," David replied, satisfied that he had won the battle. He turned back to the waiter hovering nearby. "We will take the dessert menu. Bring us the baked Alaska." I picked up my fork and took a bite of my steak. I watched him laugh with his mother, blissfully unaware that I had just quietly decided to starve his kingdom. The digital clock on my desk flashed 2 a.m. The rest of the house was entirely silent, save for the low hum of the central heating pushing warm air through the vents. I sat in the glow of my dual monitors, staring at a fresh spreadsheet. The surface of my mahogany desk felt cool against my bare forearms. I was not crying. I was not angry in any loud or messy way. Anger takes unnecessary energy, and I needed every ounce of my focus for the math sitting in front of me. I opened my personal banking portal. This was the account David never asked to see because he assumed it was a bottomless well that required no oversight. I pulled the transaction history for the last 72 months, 6 full years of marriage, 6 years of playing the supportive, quiet wife while my commission checks evaporated into a separate ecosystem to sustain his fragile pride. I started sorting the data, highlighting specific recurring rows in bright neon yellow. First, there was the $1,200 exiting my account on the first of every single month. The recipient was a luxury property management group in Milwaukee. Patricia lived in a high-rise condo there, complete with a concierge desk and a heated indoor pool overlooking the city. David always told his mother he was happy to take care of her homeowner association fees as a token of his gratitude for his upbringing. He soaked in her praise during every holiday dinner, soaking up the admiration of his relatives. Yet the routing number attached to that auto draft belonged solely to my medical software sales income. Next, I tracked down a separate $800 withdrawal hitting on the 3rd of the month. The vendor was a premium auto finance company. Jessica drove a pristine white luxury SUV with custom leather interior and a panoramic sunroof. She worked part-time at a boutique and frequently complained about the crushing burden of retail hours. David had magnanimously offered to cover her car lease, telling her, "Family always protects family." Once again, my name was the only one on the funding source. He played the generous hero using my financial armor. Then I found the third anomaly, the one that made my eyes narrow in the harsh blue light of the monitor. Every month, on the 15th, a scheduled transfer of $1,500 moved into an external holding account. David had vaguely referred to it early in our marriage as a joint family investment vehicle meant to build our future real estate portfolio. I was always too busy closing tech deals and traveling for industry conferences to audit the specific details of a fund he claimed to manage. I traced the outgoing path on the screen. The money was not sitting in an index fund. It was not generating mutual fund interest. It was vanishing into a commercial banking account I did not recognize. $3,500 every single month. I sat back in my leather office chair and stared up at the crown molding on the ceiling. I multiplied the numbers in my head just to be sure. $42,000 a year, over $250,000 since our wedding day. All of it flowing out of my hard-earned tech commissions to fund a lavish lifestyle for 3 people who looked at me like I was an inconvenient accessory at their dinner table. My husband had not contributed a single penny of his own marketing salary to these heavy expenses. He kept his own paychecks for his exclusive golf club memberships, tailored suits, and expensive bar tabs with his coworkers. Looking at those staggering digits on the screen, a vivid memory surfaced, pushing its way through the quiet dark of the office. I was 22 years old, sitting at a chipped Formica kitchen table in a cramped one-bedroom apartment. The air smelled of cheap coffee and floor cleaner. My mother sat across from me. I had just been offered a spot in an elite medical software certification program. It was the golden key to breaking into the tech industry, but the tuition was thousands of dollars out of my reach. I had cried at that table, feeling the door to my future slamming shut. My mother did not say a word of pity. She simply reached for her left hand. She twisted the plain gold wedding band off her finger, the only valuable thing she owned in the world, and placed it on the table between us. I can still hear the metallic clink it made against the Formica. She sold it the very next day to pay my tuition. My mother sacrificed the only symbol of her past to buy my future. Now her mind was slipping away. She was forgetting her own address and leaving the stove burners on all night. She needed a safe, secure memory care facility. Yet the man I married sat at a steakhouse and declared her fading mind was not his problem, while using my money to fund his mother's luxury condo and his sister's pristine car. The contrast was sharper than a surgical scalpel. It anchored my decisions in something far deeper than mere marital spite. My actions were rooted in a fierce protective love for the woman who gave up everything for me. I picked up my phone and opened a new email to my wealth manager, Marcus. He was a highly pragmatic man who understood the value of quick execution and discretion. I did not offer long emotional explanations or complaints about my marriage. The message was brief and entirely clinical. I instructed Marcus to permanently sever the 3 recurring external transfers effective immediately. I asked him to flag any future attempts from any secondary user to reinstate them. Furthermore, I told him to divert those exact funds into a newly established secure trust account exclusively under my name, designated for a long-term healthcare facility in Door County. Marcus replied within 3 minutes, despite the late hour. Confirmed. All auto drafts canceled. Trust paperwork initiated. I set the phone face down on the desk. A profound sense of liberation washed over my tired shoulders. I glanced at the large paper calendar pinned to the corkboard on my wall. It was the 24th of November. The first of the month was exactly 7 days away. 7 days until the billing cycle refreshed. 7 days until the property managers, the auto lenders, and the mysterious commercial bankers reached into those designated accounts and found nothing but dust. I closed my laptop, leaving the home office in total darkness, and walked softly down the carpeted hallway. I slipped back into the master bedroom. The space smelled of rich cologne and freshly laundered sheets. David lay spread across the center of the king-sized mattress, sleeping deeply. His chest rose and fell in a slow, untroubled rhythm. He looked so peaceful in the moonlight, filtering through the blinds. He looked like a man who believed the world revolved around his desires, and that his wife would always be a quiet, obedient machine, printing money for his pride. I slid under the heavy duvet and lay on my back, staring into the shadows above the ceiling fan. He had spoken his unyielding rule into existence at the restaurant. Your money is yours, my money is mine. I had merely enforced his exact legal framework. I wondered how long his fragile, towering ego would survive the impending financial drought. I wondered what elaborate excuse he would manufacture when his mother called him, crying about a bounced payment on her luxury home. But more than anything, I wondered what he would demand of me the very next morning. David always expected me to play the role of the generous hostess, showering his family with expensive tokens of appreciation to make him look good. His mother had a milestone birthday approaching rapidly, and he had already dropped heavy verbal hints about a specific designer handbag he expected me to purchase on his behalf. He was about to test my compliance again, blind to the fact that the vault was already sealed and the timer was ticking down to 0. The next 6 days unfolded with a bizarre, tranquil rhythm. It was the distinct, eerie calm that settles over a landscape just before a storm breaks the horizon. I moved through our spacious suburban home like a ghost, performing my usual routines with calculated precision. Every morning, I brewed the expensive, imported coffee David preferred. Every evening, I listened to him complain about the incompetence of his junior marketing staff. He strutted through our living spaces, projecting the aura of a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He remained blissfully unaware that the foundation beneath his polished leather shoes had already turned to dust. While he practiced his putting stroke on the living room rug, I finalized the legal framework for my mother's future. I spent my lunch hours on encrypted calls with my wealth manager and a senior elder care attorney. Together, we established an irrevocable trust insulated entirely from any marital assets. I funded it directly with the money I had diverted from Patricia and Jessica. The facility in Door County was a place of true dignity. It sat nestled among tall pine trees, overlooking the icy gray expanse of Lake Michigan. They offered specialized neurological care, private suites, and a staff trained to handle the heartbreaking realities of dementia. Securing her spot brought a profound sense of relief to my chest. It was the best investment I had ever made. David interpreted my quiet focus as submission. To him, a silent wife was a compliant wife. Saturday morning, he walked into the kitchen wearing a crisp white polo shirt bearing the embroidered logo of his exclusive golf club. He tossed his car keys onto the marble island with a sharp clatter and poured himself a cup of coffee. He leaned against the counter, studying me while I scrolled through my emails on my tablet. "You have been too quiet lately," he remarked, taking a slow sip from his mug. "It is putting a weird energy in the house." I did not look up from my screen, just focused on the end of the quarter sales metrics, I replied, keeping my tone mild and detached. He scoffed, waving a hand as if my career was a cute little hobby. "Right? Well, you need to shift gears today. My mother's milestone birthday dinner is next Friday. She has been dropping heavy hints about that maroon leather tote bag from the boutique down on State Street, the one with the gold hardware. It runs around $500. I need you to head downtown this afternoon and pick it up. Get them to wrap it nice." He issued the command with the casual ease of a monarch expecting a servant to fetch his slippers. He did not ask if I had the time. He certainly did not offer his own credit card to fund the purchase. He simply assumed my bank account would absorb the cost of his filial devotion. I locked my tablet screen and set it down on the smooth marble. I met his gaze directly. "I am not buying your mother a designer handbag, David." His eyebrows pulled together in a tight knot of irritation. "Do not start this, Ariana. We always get her something nice for her birthday. It makes her happy and it looks good. Do not be stingy over $500. I remained seated, resting my hands lightly in my lap. "I am not being stingy," I stated, keeping my voice unnervingly calm. "I am just following the financial boundaries you established at the steakhouse. Your mother, your problem." David let out a harsh, humorless laugh. He set his coffee mug down harder than necessary. "Are you seriously still brooding over that dinner comment? Jesus, Ariana, grow up. I was making a point about long-term financial planning. You are acting like a petulant child throwing a tantrum over a reality check." He leaned forward, placing both palms flat on the kitchen island, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. The tactic might have worked a year ago. Today, it just looked pathetic. "My money is mine," I repeated, echoing the exact cadence of his restaurant decree. "If you want her to have the bag, you can use your own debit card to purchase it." David rolled his eyes, letting out a heavy, dramatic sigh. He grabbed his keys off the counter, shaking his head in sheer disgust. "I do not have time for this passive-aggressive routine today. I have an early tea time. Just get the bag, Ariana. Do not embarrass me in front of my family next week." He turned and walked out the door, entirely confident I would bend to his will. In his mind, my defiance was a temporary glitch. I had spent 6 years smoothing over every conflict, writing every check, and swallowing every insult to maintain the peace. He calculated the odds and determined I would eventually drive to that boutique to avoid the uncomfortable tension of a marital standoff. He was half right. That afternoon, I drove my car to the high-end retail district downtown. I walked past the mannequins wearing silk trench coats and entered the boutique he specified. The air inside smelled of rich leather and expensive perfume. A well-dressed sales associate approached me with a practiced, welcoming smile. I did not ask to see the maroon leather tote. Instead, I requested to purchase one of their premium presentation boxes, complete with the velvet interior, lining the signature tissue paper, and the heavy satin ribbon they used for VIP clients. The associate looked confused, but rang up the empty packaging for a nominal fee. I carried the pristine, glossy box back to my car. Once I returned to my home office, I sat at my desk and pulled a specific document from a locked drawer. It was a formal legal notice drafted by my attorney. I folded the thick, unbending paper with extreme care. I nestled the document deep inside the layers of branded tissue paper inside the empty gift box. I closed the magnetic lid and tied the gold satin ribbon into a flawless, symmetrical bow. I placed the box on the top shelf of my closet, a beautiful, hollow Trojan horse waiting patiently for the birthday dinner. The true test of my resolve arrived 48 hours later. It was the 30th of November. The final hours of the month ticked away, casting long shadows across the living room walls. A cold autumn rain lashed against the large picture windows, mirroring the quiet storm brewing inside my mind. David was asleep on the couch, the television murmuring softly in the background, broadcasting late-night sports highlights. I sat in the armchair across the room holding a cup of chamomile tea that had long since gone cold. My eyes were fixed on the digital display of the cable box. 11:58. I thought about Patricia, sleeping in her luxury condo, ignorant of the fact that the invisible shield protecting her lifestyle was about to evaporate. I thought about Jessica driving her pristine SUV, assuming the lease payment would magically clear as it always did. 11:59. I thought about the mysterious commercial bank account, the $1,500 leak I had plugged without knowing the full depth of the toxic debt it serviced. I knew David was hiding something significant there. Shutting off the valve was the only way to force the rot to the surface. The digital numbers shifted. Midnight. It was officially the first of the month. The automatic clearinghouses were waking up across the financial sector. Automated scripts were running, querying routing numbers, seeking funds that no longer existed. The financial tap was officially dead. The money belonged to me again. I stood up from the armchair, walked over to the couch, and picked up the television remote. I turned the screen off, plunging the room into darkness. David shifted in his sleep, letting out a soft snore, entirely blind to the fact that his kingdom had just fallen. Tomorrow the sun would rise and the first domino would drop. Let him sleep, I thought, turning toward the stairs. He was going to need the energy. Day 7 broke with the bleak, gray light typical of a Wisconsin late autumn. Frost coated the window panes of our suburban colonial house, blurring the manicured lawn into a hazy white stretch. I woke up at 6 sharp, feeling a strange lightness in my bones. Today was the first of the month. The automated clearinghouses had done their silent, invisible work while the world slept. I walked into the kitchen, tying the belt of my silk robe, and began my morning ritual. I ground the dark roast espresso beans, letting the rich, bitter scent fill the room. I steamed the milk, watching the white foam rise in the stainless steel pitcher. Everything felt ordinary, but beneath the surface, tectonic plates had already shifted. I felt no anxiety, just the cool, detached patience of a hunter watching a trap, waiting for the snap. David emerged from the master suite 20 minutes later. He wore his tailored charcoal trousers and a crisp blue dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He hummed a low tune under his breath, splashing expensive aftershave onto his jawline in the hall mirror. He projected the effortless confidence of a man who believed reality bent to his convenience. He poured himself a cup of my fresh brew, oblivious to the ticking timer that had just struck 0. He checked his luxury watch, a piece I purchased for our 3rd anniversary, and grabbed his leather briefcase. The shrill chime of his smartphone shattered the quiet domestic scene. The caller ID flashed on the kitchen island marble. Jessica. It was barely 7 in the morning, a time his younger sister normally reserved for deep sleep. Jessica despised early hours. She treated her part-time retail job like an unbearable burden, always insisting she needed proper rest to maintain her aesthetic. Her pristine white SUV was a status symbol she flaunted to her friends, pretending her brother was a self-made millionaire funding her lavish lifestyle. For her to call before sunrise meant something had gone terribly wrong in her sheltered universe. David tapped the screen, answering on speakerphone as he reached for the sugar bowl. "What is going on with the car payment, David?" she shrieked. Her voice echoed off the subway tile backsplash, shrill and tight with panic. I just got a text alert from the auto finance portal. The auto draft bounced. They are charging me a late penalty and threatening to report the missed cycle to the credit bureaus. Fix it right now. You promised me this lease was covered. I cannot have my credit ruined over your mistake. David froze the silver spoon hovering halfway to his cup. A confused frown creased his forehead. He cleared his throat, trying to maintain his authoritative older brother persona. Relax, Jess. It is probably just a routing error. The banking servers get overloaded on the first of the month. Let me check the portal and push it through manually. Just take a breath. I will handle it like I always do. He disconnected the call and swiped out of his dialer. I leaned against the counter, cradling my warm ceramic mug, observing him like a scientist watching a predictable chemical reaction. He tapped the icon for his primary financial institution. The biometric scanner read his face. A small loading circle spun on the screen for 3 agonizing seconds. The external management fund he used to disperse payments to his family required my scheduled influx of cash to survive. He had set it up years ago, insisting it was easier for him to manage the logistics of his family expenses if I just routed a flat sum to his ledger. It was a clever accounting trick that allowed him to play the generous benefactor while I remained the invisible backer. I watched the exact moment his brain processed the numbers on his retina display. His shoulders dropped instantly, losing their confident posture. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving a sallow, pale hue. He blinked rapidly, tapping the glass screen again, as if a harder touch would magically summon the missing digits. Today, that balance sat at a stark, unyielding 0. My scheduled $3,500 was gone, diverted safely into my private trust. David slowly lifted his head. The charming facade melted away, leaving something raw and frantic underneath. He stared at me, standing calmly by the espresso machine. "Where is the deposit?" he demanded. His voice sounded thin, stripped of its usual booming resonance. "The routing transfer from your side did not clear. Did your payroll department make a mistake?" I took a slow sip of my latte. The warm foam coated my tongue, providing a small comfort against the chill of the room. "I did not send it," I replied, my tone conversational and light. He stepped closer, the rubber soles of his dress shoes squeaking faintly against the hardwood floor. "What do you mean you did not send it? My sister is freaking out over a bounced lease. You need to log in right now and initiate a wire. They are going to hit her with penalties and her credit score will tank. She needs her vehicle for work, Ariana." I set my mug down on the counter. The ceramic made a soft clink against the stone surface. I tilted my head, studying his rising desperation. "I am not initiating a wire, David. I canceled the recurring drafts, all of them. There is no glitch. The bank is operating exactly as I instructed." "Canceled? Why would you cancel them? Are you trying to ruin my morning before a major marketing pitch? What is wrong with you?" "Because I am respecting your boundaries," I stated clearly, holding his gaze without blinking. "I am honoring the exact financial structure you demanded at the steakhouse last week. Your sister? Your problem." He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. The memory of his own arrogant decree flashed behind his eyes. He realized in real time that I had weaponized his own logic against him. I had not argued or cried. I simply obeyed his command to the letter. But David possessed a fragile ego that could never simply accept defeat. He needed to strike back to reclaim his lost territory, to prove he still commanded the ship. "Fine," he spat, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. "You want to play petty accounting games? 2 can play that game. I am logging into the joint savings right now. I will freeze the entire account. You will not be able to touch a single dime of our shared safety net until you stop this ridiculous tantrum and turn the transfers back on." I felt a genuine laugh bubble up in my chest. I let it escape, a soft, amused sound that seemed to infuriate him even more. I gestured toward his phone with an open hand. "Please do," I encouraged him. "Call the branch manager. Lock it down right this second." David hesitated, his thumb hovering over the screen. He searched my face for any sign of bluffing. He found none. The truth was, the joint savings account was a hollow shell. I stopped depositing my commission bonuses into that shared bucket 3 years ago when I noticed his frequent, unexplained withdrawals for luxury golf clubs and high-end whiskey. The only money sitting in that specific ledger was his meager bi-monthly contribution, which barely covered his country club dues and premium sports subscriptions. Freezing it would only restrict his own petty cash, leaving him unable to pay his personal bar tabs. He had no leverage over my wealth. My income was locked safely behind biometric firewalls in private accounts he could not even see, let alone touch. The realization washed over him in a sickening wave. He lowered his phone, his arm hanging limp at his side. He stood in the hallway, a man stripped of his unearned power, suddenly grasping the sheer magnitude of his vulnerability. He had spent years performing the role of a wealthy patriarch, using my armor. Now he stood naked on the battlefield, facing the sharp end of his own rules. The silence in the kitchen stretched out taut as a piano wire. Neither of us moved. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator. Then the smartphone in his hand vibrated against his thigh. The screen lit up, casting a harsh glow across his pale knuckles. The caller ID displayed his mother's name. Patricia was ringing. David swallowed hard, staring at the flashing text. His chest heaved with shallow breaths. The sheer panic in his eyes told me the rot was spreading much faster than he could ever manage. The second domino was about to fall, and this one carried a much heavier price tag than a luxury car lease. David stared at the vibrating device in his palm like it was a live grenade. The caller ID flashed his mother's name in bright white letters against the glass screen. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing against his unbuttoned collar. For a brief second, I thought he might toss the phone into the stainless steel sink and flee the house. Instead, instinct took over. He swiped the green icon and brought the speaker to his ear, attempting to project a calm he did not possess. "Mom," he answered, his voice cracking slightly. The audio bled through the earpiece loud enough for me to hear every frantic syllable. Patricia was weeping. This was not her usual delicate theatrical performance designed to garner sympathy at a dinner party. This was raw, jagged panic. "David, what is going on?" she shrieked. The sound echoed off the subway tile backsplash. "I just walked down to the lobby for my morning Pilates class." Eleanor, the condo board president, stopped me in front of everyone. She handed me a neon pink delinquency notice, right there by the concierge desk. My homeowner association fee bounced. David squeezed his eyes shut, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I am fixing it, Mom. It is a banking error. The servers are slow this morning." "No, it is not a banking error," Patricia sobbed, her voice elevating to a hysterical pitch. The bounce triggered an automatic ledger review by the property management group. They run the escrow for the entire building. "They pulled my file, David. They pulled my file, and Eleanor told me my actual mortgage is 6 months in arrears. 6 entire months. They are threatening pre-foreclosure proceedings." The air in the kitchen grew dense. A suffocating silence fell over David. His dark secret had just breached the surface, catching the morning light for everyone to see. The missing puzzle piece slid perfectly into place inside my mind. For half a year, he had been receiving the monthly $3,500 allocation from my accounts. He paid the $1,200 HOA to maintain appearances with the neighbors. He paid his sister's car lease to keep her quiet. But he had been secretly skimming the remaining mortgage portion, funneling it into his mysterious external ledger to cover his own hidden disasters. He let his mother live in a high-rise glass tower, unaware the structural beams had been repossessed seasons ago. "Mom, please lower your voice," David pleaded, turning his back to me. He hunched over the marble counter, attempting to shield his failure. "I will call the management office right now. I will wire the funds today. Just go back upstairs and lock your door." He terminated the connection before she could scream another word. He stood facing the refrigerator, breathing in ragged, shallow gasps. The polished, successful marketing manager had vanished entirely. In his place stood a terrified boy caught stealing from the vault. He whipped around, his hands shaking as he pulled his slim leather wallet from his back pocket. He dumped the contents onto the kitchen island. Platinum credit cards scattered across the smooth stone surface. David snatched his phone, unlocking his various financial apps with frantic thumb strikes. He muttered under his breath, calculating limits, attempting to scrape together enough credit to stave off the eviction notice. I watched the reflection of his screen dancing in his eyes. A stark red banner appeared on the glass. Transaction declined. Credit limit exceeded. He threw that card down and tried the next one. Declined again. His personal spending habits had hollowed out his own safety nets long ago. Tailored suits and expensive steakhouse dinners do not leave room for emergency liquidity. He leaned against the counter, defeated. The plastic cards lay useless on the marble. The scent of his premium aftershave mixed with the sour tang of nervous sweat. He slowly lifted his head and met my gaze. The arrogance that usually defined his posture was gone, replaced by a pathetic, desperate hunger. "Ariana," he whispered. I took another sip of my latte, savoring the rich espresso notes. I did not offer a lifeline. I waited for him to speak. "I need a short-term loan," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Just $10,000, enough to clear the mortgage arrears and cover the HOA penalty. I will pay you back. I have a big marketing bonus coming at the end of the quarter. I swear on my life I will pay you back with interest. Just transfer the funds to my checking account so I can wire the property manager." I set my ceramic mug down. I walked over to the kitchen drawer where I kept my household files. I slid the drawer open and extracted a thin manila folder. I had prepared this specific document during my late-night audit, knowing this exact conversation would eventually occur. I walked back to the island and laid the open folder next to his useless credit cards. "Look at the bottom line," I instructed, keeping my tone devoid of emotion. David stared at the printed spreadsheet. I had tallied every single monthly transfer, every vacation I funded, every luxury purchase his family enjoyed over the last 2,190 days. The final sum was highlighted in bold black ink. $252,000, I read aloud, ensuring the number hung in the quiet air. "That is your current outstanding balance, David. That is the exact amount of my income you utilized to build your reputation as a generous son." He swallowed hard, avoiding my eyes. "Ariana, please. My mother is going to lose her home. Eleanor will tell the entire bridge club. Patricia will be a social pariah in Milwaukee. You know how much her reputation means to her. She cannot handle that kind of humiliation." I tilted my head, studying his face. I thought about my mother, sitting in a sterile room, forgetting the names of her favorite books. I thought about the genuine medical terror my family faced, compared to the superficial social embarrassment his mother was currently enduring. I remembered the smirk Patricia wore when David declared, "My parents were my problem alone." "I am not a commercial bank," I stated, folding my hands together. "And even if I were, I do not extend lines of credit to accounts currently in default. You established the financial borders in this marriage. I am merely enforcing them." "You are doing this on purpose," he seethed, a fresh wave of defensive anger washing over his features. "You are trying to punish me for one comment at a restaurant." "I am doing math," I corrected him. "Math does not have a vendetta. It just balances the scales." Before he could launch into another defensive tirade, a harsh mechanical sound interrupted the standoff. Tires screeched sharply against the asphalt of our driveway. The noise tore through the quiet suburban morning, shattering the domestic quiet. I turned my head toward the large picture window overlooking the front lawn. Jessica drove her pristine white SUV at a crooked, reckless angle, parking half on the concrete and half on my manicured grass. The engine cut off. 2 car doors slammed shut in rapid succession, echoing like gunshots in the crisp autumn air. Patricia marched up the front walkway. She still wore her athletic leggings and premium running jacket from the Pilates class, but her face was flushed a dark mottled red. She clutched the neon pink delinquency notice in her fist, crumbling the paper with every determined step. Jessica trailed right behind her, gripping her car keys tight, her expression twisted into a furious scowl. The digital panic had officially run its course. The crisis could no longer be contained within the sterile borders of banking apps and telephone calls. The fallout had arrived at my front door, breathing heavy and demanding answers. David stepped back from the window, his chest rising and falling in rapid, panicked spasms. "They are here," he whispered, pointing a trembling finger toward the heavy oak front door. "Ariana, you have to fix this. You have to tell them there was a bank error. You have to cover for me. Do not let them know I stopped paying the mortgage." The doorbell rang, a long, continuous chime that signaled fury rather than a polite morning visit. I smoothed the lapels of my silk robe. I walked past my terrified husband, leaving him stranded by the Marble Island surrounded by his maxed-out credit cards and the printed proof of his lies. I did not feel fear as my hand gripped the cool brass doorknob. I felt the profound, steady calm of a woman ready to welcome the storm inside her house. The damp, cold air of the Wisconsin morning swept into the foyer, carrying the scent of wet asphalt and fallen oak leaves as I pulled the heavy brass handle inward. Patricia did not wait for an invitation. She brushed past me, her athletic sneakers squeaking sharply against the polished hardwood. Jessica trailed right behind her, radiating nervous energy. Neither of them offered a greeting. They did not even look me in the eye. David, Patricia shouted, her voice echoing off the high vaulted ceiling of the entryway. She marched straight into the kitchen, waving the crumpled pink delinquency notice like a battle flag. Eleanor handed me this humiliation in the lobby. You told me the property management software was undergoing an update. You lied to me. Jessica crossed her arms, shivering in her thin designer jacket. And my auto finance portal locked me out. They flagged my account for a missed lease cycle. Ariana, get your laptop and fix whatever banking glitch David caused. I cannot have a repossession on my credit record. I closed the front door, pushing the deadbolt into place with a definitive click. I leaned against the cool wood, studying the frantic scene. It was a fascinating psychological display. Even in the midst of a severe financial panic, they still clung to their established hierarchy. In their minds, David was the wealthy provider who had simply made an administrative error. I was merely the obedient secretary expected to log into the portal and correct the routing numbers. I am not fetching my laptop, I said, keeping my tone even and unhurried. Why do we not all step into the living room? We need to review some paperwork. Patricia paused her righteous indignation, faltering for a fraction of a second. She exchanged a confused glance with Jessica. David stood frozen by the Marble Island, his face a pale mask of dread. He knew what was coming, but he lacked the courage to intercept it. He followed us into the adjacent room like a condemned man walking to the gallows. I took a seat on the velvet armchair. Patricia perched rigidly on the edge of the leather sofa, smoothing her athletic leggings. Jessica sat beside her, clutching her smartphone tight against her chest. I reached down to the lower shelf of the glass coffee table and retrieved a thick black binder. I had assembled this specific portfolio during my midnight audit. It was a curated collection of financial truth. I slid the heavy binder across the smooth glass. It stopped directly in front of Patricia. "Open it," I instructed. Patricia frowned, her manicured fingers hesitating over the black plastic cover. She flipped it open to the first tab. Inside sat a stack of printed bank statements dating back 6 years. I had used a bright yellow marker to highlight specific rows of data. "What am I looking at?" Patricia asked, her tone defensive but wavering. "You are looking at the architecture of your lifestyle," I replied, crossing my legs. The left column displays the date of the transaction. The middle column shows the designated amount. The right column lists the originating account. Please read the name printed at the top of that third column. Patricia lowered her gaze to the paper. She adjusted her reading glasses. Her eyes scanned the highlighted text. The rigid posture of her shoulders began to dissolve. Jessica leaned closer, reading over her mother's shoulder. "Mason Medical Tech Commissions." Jessica read aloud, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Wait, that is your corporate payroll account, Ariana." "That is correct," I nodded. "Every month on the 3rd, I wire $800 to your premium auto finance company. I have funded every single lease payment on that white SUV since you drove it off the lot 3 years ago." Jessica stared at me, her mouth falling open. The pristine vehicle she used as a status symbol, the car she flaunted to her retail coworkers, was a gift from the woman she routinely ignored at family gatherings. The realization struck her physical body. She shrank back against the leather cushions, the color draining from her cheeks. Patricia turned the page, her hands beginning to tremble. The bright yellow lines continued row after row, year after year. $1,200 on the 1st of every month routed to the luxury property management group in Milwaukee. David. Patricia breathed, her voice hollow and fragile. Why is her name on the HOA transfers? Why is her name on everything? Because David does not pay your bills, Patricia, I said, delivering the truth with the steady precision of a surgeon. He never has. He makes a modest salary as a mid-level marketing manager. He keeps his paychecks to cover his golf club dues and his tailored suits. Every seafood tower you ate, every cashmere wrap you wore, every homeowner association fee that kept you in that glass tower came directly from my software sales. Patricia looked up from the binder. The haughty matriarch who smirked at the steakhouse was gone. In her place sat a profoundly humiliated woman. Her entire social standing among her wealthy neighbors was built on a fabricated illusion. She was not the revered mother of a highly successful son. She was a charity case, subsidized by a daughter-in-law she deemed inferior. The shame washed over her features in a dark, suffocating wave. David stepped forward, his hands raised in a frantic, placating gesture. Mom, do not listen to her. She is twisting the narrative to make me look bad. We are married. It is marital money. We share our resources to support the family. It is just an accounting technicality. Patricia slowly turned her head to look at her son. The expression on her face was chilling. It was a mixture of profound betrayal and pure, unadulterated disgust. "Do not speak to me," she whispered. Her voice carried no warmth. "You let me brag about you to my bridge club. You let me boast about my generous, successful boy, while you were spending her money. You humiliated me, David." He flinched as if she had struck him across the face. "Mom, please, let me explain." I said, "Do not speak to me," she snapped, shutting the binder with a sharp, definitive thud. She stood up, her knees trembling slightly. She did not grab the neon pink delinquency notice from the table. She left it sitting there, a stark reminder of her actual reality. "Come on, Jessica, we are leaving." Jessica stood, silently, refusing to look at her brother. She followed her mother out of the living room. The heavy brass front door opened and closed. The engine of the white SUV started up, and the tires crunched down the driveway, fading into the distance. The house fell into a deafening silence. David stood in the center of the living room, staring at the closed front door. His reputation as the golden child lay in shattered pieces on the floor. His family knew the truth. But as I watched him, I noticed a subtle shift in his posture. He slowly turned his gaze back to the black binder sitting on the glass table. During my midnight audit, I made a highly strategic choice. I printed the records for the car lease and the condo fees. I intentionally excluded the $1,500 monthly transfer to the unknown commercial bank account. I kept the secret commercial debt entirely hidden from the binder. David recognized the omission. I saw the faint glimmer of relief wash across his eyes. His shoulders relaxed just a fraction of an inch. His family knew he was broke, but they did not know he was hiding a toxic liability. He still believed his darkest secret remained secure in the shadows. He believed he still held a hidden card he could play to survive the fallout. He cleared his throat, attempting to summon a shred of his former authority. He adjusted his collar, projecting a false bravado. "You enjoyed that, did you not?" he sneered, taking a step toward me. "You enjoyed tearing my family apart over a dinner conversation. This is sick, Ariana. You are emotionally unstable. You need professional help. We are going to fix this marriage, but you are going to talk to someone first. I am booking us an emergency session with a counselor." I remained seated on the velvet armchair. I folded my hands together, maintaining my serene smile. I knew the counseling demand was a manipulative trap designed to paint me as the villain and force me to reopen the financial tap. But a trap only works if the prey does not see the steel jaws waiting in the brush. "I think therapy is a wonderful idea, David," I replied, keeping my voice light and agreeable. "Book the session. I look forward to it." He blinked, caught off guard by my rapid compliance. He thought he had just regained control of the steering wheel. He had no idea I had already mapped the route straight toward a legal cliff. The clinical office of Dr. Aris Thorne smelled faintly of white sage and polished cedar. Soft ambient noise machines masked the sounds of the bustling Madison Street below. I sat on a plush velvet sofa, keeping my posture perfectly aligned. Beside me, David slouched forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He wore a soft gray cashmere sweater designed to make him look approachable and wounded. He was playing the role of the deeply injured partner with Oscar-worthy dedication. Before arriving at this neutral sanctuary, I had taken a very specific detour. The previous afternoon, I met with Silas, a forensic accountant recommended by my wealth manager. Silas possessed the ruthless efficiency of a corporate shark. Within 2 hours, he had pierced the veil of David's mysterious commercial holding ledger. He handed me a dossier revealing exactly where the missing $1,500 vanished every month. I walked into this therapy session holding a royal flush. My spouse, however, firmly believed I was holding nothing but blind resentment. Dr. Thorne adjusted his glasses, resting a yellow notepad on his lap. He possessed a calm, measured voice, suited for diffusing marital bombs. "David, why do you not start us off today?" the counselor suggested. My husband exhaled a long, theatrical sigh. He rubbed his eyes, attempting to summon a physical manifestation of exhaustion. "Aris, I am at a complete loss," he began, his tone dropping an octave to sound shattered. "We had a minor disagreement at a restaurant last week, a simple misunderstanding about long-term elder care strategy. Instead of communicating her frustrations, Ariana chose to enact sudden, vindictive financial abuse. She unilaterally cut off my elderly mother. She stranded my younger sister. She is using her corporate income as a weapon to humiliate me in front of my own relatives." I listened to his narrative without offering a single twitch of reaction. I focused on the gentle ticking of the mahogany grandfather clock in the corner of the room. David was weaving a masterpiece of manipulation. He intentionally omitted the part where he dismissed my mother's dementia. He conveniently forgot to mention the $250,000 he extracted from my payroll account over 6 years. He framed himself as a victim, held hostage by a cruel, calculating wife. "I just want my partner back," David continued, his voice cracking with simulated grief. "I want the woman I married, the woman who valued teamwork and family unity. I cannot live in a home where my spouse acts like a hostile corporate raider, punishing my loved ones to win a petty argument." Dr. Thorne nodded sympathetically, jotting a brief note on his pad. He turned his attention toward me. "Ariana, how do you respond to hearing David express this profound sense of betrayal?" I uncrossed my legs, planting my feet firmly on the woven wool rug. I looked directly into my husband's eyes. I did not see sorrow. I saw a predator testing the fences, looking for a weak spot to exploit. He fully expected me to explode to defend my character, to yell about his lies. He wanted me to look unstable in front of a licensed professional. "I think David is expressing a very valid fear," I said, keeping my pitch melodic and agreeable. David blinked. The muscles in his jaw slackened. He had armed himself for a screaming match, and I had just handed him a bouquet of validation. "Financial instability is terrifying." I continued, turning my gaze to the psychologist. "I understand why he feels unmoored. We entered this marriage with unspoken assumptions about resource allocation. Those assumptions fractured. Trust has been completely broken. David needs to feel secure, and I need to feel respected. We require a structured boundary to heal this divide." David leaned back against the sofa cushions, a triumphant gleam sparking in his pupils. He thought he had won. He believed his pathetic performance successfully guilted me into surrendering. In his mind, my talk of structured boundaries was just corporate jargon for turning his monthly allowance back on. "What kind of boundaries are you proposing, Ariana?" the doctor inquired. I opened my leather tote bag sitting on the floor beside my feet. I pulled out a thick, stapled stack of legal paper. I placed it gently on the glass coffee table separating us from the counselor. "A post-nuptial agreement," I announced. The air in the room shifted. David stared at the document, his triumphant gleam dimming slightly. "What is that?" he asked, his voice losing its fragile, wounded edge. "It is a roadmap for our healing," I explained, offering him a serene, reassuring smile. "If we are going to rebuild this marriage, we need absolute transparency. This contract establishes clear, independent ownership of our respective assets moving forward. It removes the ambiguity that caused our current conflict. It dictates that your marketing salary is wholly yours to manage, and my medical software income is wholly mine. By signing this, we eliminate the financial power dynamic. We return to being equal partners. David stared at the white pages. His ego was a massive blind spot. He was so arrogant, so convinced of his superior intellect, he assumed I drafted a standard generic template to placate my own anxieties. He figured he could sign the paper, play the role of the compliant husband, and easily manipulate me into writing checks for his mother again next month. Dr. Thorne leaned forward, observing the interaction. This is a significant legal step, David. You are under no obligation to sign anything in this office today. You should have independent counsel review any binding instrument. I do not need a lawyer, David scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. He picked up a silver pen from the table. He wanted to demonstrate his willingness to compromise, cementing his status as the reasonable victim in the room. He flipped past the first few pages, barely scanning the dense legalese. If this piece of paper makes Ariana feel secure enough to stop punishing my family, then I will sign it right now. I just want peace. He clicked the pen and scrawled his signature across the final page. He pushed the document back toward me, sliding it across the glass surface. There, he declared, we are protected. Now we can stop this madness and get back to normal. I picked up the signed contract, sliding it safely back into my leather tote. A rush of pure, crystalline adrenaline surged through my veins. David possessed no idea what he had just executed. He skipped over page 4. Page 4 contained an ironclad clause drafted by my ruthless legal team. That specific paragraph legally walled off all of my future corporate commissions, my executive bonuses, and my lucrative tech company stock options. It explicitly waived his right to claim a single share of my equity in the event of a divorce. He had just voluntarily surrendered millions of dollars in future wealth, all because he was too arrogant to read the fine print. "Thank you, David," I murmured, zipping my bag shut. This is a tremendous step forward. The therapy session concluded 20 minutes later with Dr. Thorne commending our constructive dialogue. We walked out of the climate-controlled building and stepped onto the busy Madison sidewalk. The autumn wind bit through my wool coat, but I felt incredibly warm. David walked beside me, his chest puffed out, projecting the swagger of a man who believed he had successfully outsmarted his opponent. "I am glad we did that," he said, buttoning his jacket. "It takes a big person to admit they overreacted. Ariana, let us just put this ugly chapter behind us. I will text my mother and tell her you are sorting out the banking error this afternoon." I did not bother correcting his delusion. I did not need to. The universe was about to do it for me. Before I could unlock my car, his smartphone erupted with a harsh, blaring ringtone. It was not the standard polite chime he used for family or coworkers. It was a loud, obnoxious alarm tone he assigned to unknown numbers. He pulled the device from his pocket, glancing at the screen. The swagger instantly evaporated from his posture. His face turned a shade of chalky white that rivaled his reaction at the steakhouse. He stared at the flashing numbers, paralyzed. The caller was not his mother. It was not his sister. It was the consequence of the $1,500 ledger I had severed. The secret commercial debt he kept hidden in the shadows was actively hunting him down in broad daylight. The trap was fully set, and the steel jaws were about to snap shut. The harsh, blaring ringtone fractured the crisp autumn air. David stood frozen on the Madison sidewalk, clutching the vibrating device. The screen illuminated his pale, terrified features. The caller ID displayed an out-of-state area code. It was not a saved contact. It was the relentless arrival of a consequence he could no longer afford to delay. He stared at the flashing numbers, his thumb hovering over the red reject icon. His chest rose and fell in quick, shallow bursts. He swallowed hard, his throat visibly tight. He tapped the screen, sending the call directly to voicemail. He shoved the phone deep into his coat pocket and forced a rigid, unnatural smile onto his face. "Spam calls," he muttered, his voice brittle and thin. "They never stop ringing these days. It is endless." I adjusted the collar of my wool coat, blocking the biting wind rolling off Lake Mendota. I did not challenge his pathetic lie. I knew exactly who was calling him from that unknown Chicago number. I knew because Silas, the forensic accountant, had handed me the exact architecture of my husband's impending doom just 24 hours prior. The memory of that sterile accounting office played in my mind with sharp clarity. Silas sat across a polished steel table, sliding a heavy gray folder toward me. He did not offer pity or soft condolences. He delivered raw data. Silas peeled back the layers of the mysterious commercial holding ledger, exposing the rot festering underneath. The $1,500 exiting my payroll account on the 15th of every month was never an investment. It did not purchase index funds or real estate equity. It functioned as a minimum interest payment, servicing a predatory commercial note. The beneficiary of this toxic debt was a failing business venture in Green Bay. Bradley Mason owned a sprawling, dilapidated craft brewery called Hop and Anchor. David idolized his older brother. Bradley possessed the rugged, entrepreneurial spirit David desperately envied, but the brewery was bleeding capital. The local market rejected his bitter, experimental sour ales. The tap room stood empty. Creditors circled the sinking ship. David saw an opportunity to play the wealthy savior. He wanted to bankroll his brother's dream, cementing his status as the indispensable kingmaker of the Mason family. But David possessed no actual wealth to lend. Silas opened the folder to the 4th page. He pointed a manicured finger at a dense legal paragraph. The hard money lending firm required substantial collateral to issue a high-risk commercial loan to a failing brewery. They demanded liquid assets. I looked down at the signature line on the loan origination document. My name rested there, executed in smooth blue ink. It was a flawless forgery. David utilized a digital replica of my signature lifted directly from our joint tax returns. He did not just borrow money in secret. He pledged my restricted stock units. He leveraged my vested corporate equity from the medical software firm to guarantee his brother's bad business decisions. If the monthly interest payments ceased, the shadow lenders possessed the legal authority to seize my portfolio. My husband had crossed a terrifying threshold. He was no longer just a lazy partner skimming cash to buy tailored suits and appease his mother. He was a felony liability. He committed federal wire fraud and identity theft inside the walls of our own home. By freezing the monthly transfers, I stopped the interest payments. The grace period expired at midnight. The lenders were not polite customer service representatives. They were aggressive debt collectors, demanding immediate satisfaction for a defaulted commercial note. They were calling his cell phone. Soon they would start calling his office. David wiped a bead of cold sweat from his temple, despite the freezing wind chilling the Wisconsin street. "Let us just go home," he said, shifting his weight nervously. "I need to review some marketing analytics before the weekend. I want to clear my desk so we can focus on our new, fresh start." I fell into step beside him, walking toward the parking garage. "A fresh start sounds wonderful, David. In fact, I think we should test our new healthy dynamic right away. Bradley is hosting his annual end-of-autumn barbecue in Green Bay tomorrow afternoon. We are going." David stopped walking. His dress shoes scraped loudly against the concrete sidewalk. He turned toward me, his eyes wide with genuine panic. "Green Bay? No, we cannot go to Green Bay this weekend. I have too much work, Ariana. I need to prepare a massive pitch for Monday." I tilted my head, projecting an aura of gentle concern. Dr. Thorne specifically advised us to reintegrate into family settings. We need to demonstrate a united front. We signed the postnuptial agreement to build trust. Skipping your brother's barbecue sends the wrong message. It makes it look like we are hiding. We are not hiding anything, are we, David? He opened his mouth to argue, but the words died in his throat. He was trapped inside his own false narrative. He spent the entire therapy session pleading for family unity and marital teamwork. Refusing to attend the cookout shattered the fragile victim persona he just spent an hour constructing. He searched my face for any hint of suspicion, but found only the serene, supportive smile of a dutiful wife. Right, he swallowed his voice, barely a whisper. Family unity. We should go. I will text Bradley and tell him to expect us. The drive north to Green Bay the following afternoon was suffocating. The sky hung low, heavy with dense gray clouds promising winter snow. Bare trees lined the highway, looking like fractured bones against the bleak horizon. The heater in the luxury sedan hummed quietly, pushing warm air into the cabin. David gripped the leather steering wheel with white knuckles. He drove in complete silence. His phone sat face down in the center console. Every few minutes, the screen illuminated, casting a faint glow into the car. The device vibrated with a relentless, buzzing rhythm. The lenders were escalating their pursuit. They were leaving voicemails, sending urgent text messages, demanding contact. David ignored every single notification, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. He was driving straight into a financial slaughterhouse. Bradley relied on those $1,500 payments to keep the creditors at bay. Bradley possessed no idea the funds originated from my payroll account. He believed his younger brother was a highly successful marketing executive, generously keeping the brewery afloat. When we arrived at that cookout, Bradley would demand answers about the missed payment. David would have to face the brother he deceived while standing next to the wife whose identity he stole. I rested my head against the cool glass of the passenger window, watching the barren Wisconsin landscape roll past. I felt a profound sense of peace. For 6 years, I endured the condescending remarks, the unearned arrogance, the quiet dismissal of my own worth. Today, the bill was due. We exited the highway and navigated the winding suburban streets of Green Bay. The scent of wood smoke drifted through the neighborhood vents. We pulled up to a modest ranch-style house. Cars lined the street. The faint sound of classic rock music echoed from the backyard. David turned the engine off. He sat in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead at the garage door. He looked physically ill. A fine tremor shook his hands as he reached for the door handle. "Ready?" I asked, keeping my tone bright and cheerful. He nodded slowly, unable to speak. We walked up the paved driveway, heading toward the wooden side gate leading to the backyard. The smell of roasted pork and charred charcoal grew stronger. I heard the loud, boisterous laughter of his extended family drifting over the fence. They were drinking cheap beer and enjoying a crisp autumn afternoon, entirely oblivious to the federal crime walking through their garden gate. I pushed the wooden latch open. The hinges squeaked, announcing our arrival to the crowded patio. Bradley stood by a large steel smoker holding a pair of metal tongs. He looked up, seeing his younger brother. The smile on Bradley's face vanished instantly. The relaxed party atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a sudden, chilling tension that signaled the beginning of the end. The wooden gate swung shut behind us, sealing us inside the crowded Green Bay backyard. The sharp scent of burning hickory wood and charred pork hung thick in the chilly autumn air. Classic rock blared from a portable wireless speaker resting on a plastic cooler. Dozens of relatives milled around the patio, clutching frosted cans of cheap beer. They wore heavy flannel shirts and insulated vests, shouting over the music, displaying the carefree energy of a family enjoying a carefree weekend. Bradley stood by the large steel smoker. He wore a stained canvas apron over a faded graphic t-shirt. His hands were calloused and covered in dark grease reflecting years of manual labor pouring into a failing business. He did not look up and smile when we approached. He did not offer his younger brother a customary greeting. Bradley slammed his heavy metal tongs onto the wooden prep table with a sharp, clattering bang. The abrasive sound cut through the melody of the rock song, causing a few nearby aunts and uncles to turn their heads. "Where is the wire?" Bradley demanded. His voice carried a raw, guttural edge vibrating with pure stress. David flinched, stepping back so quickly his heel caught the edge of a concrete paving stone. He raised his hands, palms facing outward, attempting to project a calming influence he did not possess. "Brad, keep your voice down. We are at a party. Let us step inside the garage and talk about the accounting delay." "There is no party today," Bradley snarled, closing the distance between them. He pointed a grease-stained finger directly at David's sternum. The mezzanine lenders called the taproom landline this morning. They bypassed you because you stopped answering your phone. They told me the grace period expired at midnight. The commercial note is in default. They are sending a representative on Monday morning to change the locks on my building and seize my brewing tanks. The blood drained entirely from David's face. He swallowed rapidly, his eyes darting around the patio. Several guests had stopped talking. The ambient chatter of the barbecue faded away, replaced by a tense, suffocating silence. Even the music seemed to drop in volume. "It is just a banking hold," David stammered, his voice thin and unconvincing. "The routing numbers got scrambled during a routine ledger update. I will call the broker on Monday. I will authorize a manual push. You are not losing the brewery, Brad. I promised I would back your dream, and I always handle the logistics." Bradley let out a harsh, barking laugh that contained zero humor. "You handle nothing," he shouted, stepping even closer until he was inches from his brother's face. "You strut around here acting like a venture capitalist. You promised me a continuous pipeline of liquidity. I signed that predatory loan because you swore your investment accounts would cover the monthly interest. Now I have a collection agent threatening to liquidate my life's work, and you are standing here feeding me corporate jargon about routing numbers. Where is the $1,500, David?" I watched the confrontation unfold from the edge of the patio, maintaining my quiet, serene posture. David was trapped. He could not admit the money belonged to me. He could not confess that he had forged my signature to secure the loan. He was paralyzed by his own fabricated identity. Before David could formulate another pathetic lie, Patricia pushed her way through the crowd of silent relatives. She marched across the concrete patio, her face flushed a dark mottled crimson. She wore a heavy knit cardigan, clutching a plastic cup of white wine. She was desperate to maintain the pristine public image of her golden child. The humiliation she suffered in my living room yesterday had simmered into a toxic, boiling rage. "Stop this right now," Patricia barked, stepping between her two grown sons. "People are staring. We do not air our private financial burdens in front of the entire neighborhood." Bradley glared down at his mother. "Tell your favorite son to transfer the cash, Mom. He is about to bankrupt my company." Patricia turned her venomous gaze toward David. Her maternal veneer cracked, exposing the ugly, calculating reality underneath. She did not defend his wealth. She exposed his incompetence. "I told you exactly how to handle her," Patricia hissed, her voice sharp and dripping with condescension. She pointed a manicured finger at David, but her eyes flicked toward me. "I gave you the precise script, David. I taught you how to manage a career-obsessed woman. You flatter their independence and you stroke their ego. You were supposed to ask her for a temporary liquidity bridge, framing it as a joint family investment. I coached you on how to extract that money without triggering her financial boundaries. How could you be so stupid to just let the automatic drafts bounce? You ruined everything because you were too lazy to follow my instructions." The icy detachment inside my chest solidified into unbreakable titanium. The revelation struck me with the force of a physical blow, but I did not let a single muscle in my face twitch. The betrayal was not an isolated incident. It was an orchestrated, multi-generational conspiracy. Patricia knew the money belonged to me all along. She sat at that expensive steakhouse drinking Napa Valley Cabernet, playing the role of the haughty aristocrat, knowing my software commissions funded the entire charade. She had actively trained her son to operate as a parasite, offering tactical advice on how to siphon my wealth while keeping me docile and oblivious. The depth of their shared grift was staggering. They viewed me as nothing more than a convenient ATM, a gullible host they could bleed dry to maintain their unearned status. Bradley blinked, absorbing his mother's frantic admission. He slowly turned his head to look at me, standing quietly by the wooden gate. The realization dawned in his eyes, replacing his anger with sheer, desperate terror. He understood immediately. David was a fraud. David held zero equity. I was the actual bank. Ariana Bradley pleaded, his voice dropping to a raw, desperate whisper. He abandoned his pride entirely. He took a hesitant step toward me. "Please, You have to authorize the wire. I put my house up as collateral on a secondary note to buy those fermentation tanks. If the primary lenders foreclose on the commercial property, I will lose my home. My kids will have nowhere to live. I know David lied to me, but you cannot let my family sink over his mistake. Just issue a bridge loan until I can secure new financing. I looked at the grease on his hands. I looked at the panic shining in his eyes. I walked over to the buffet table covered in red, checkered plastic. I picked up a disposable plastic fork. I stabbed a small piece of potato salad coated in yellow mustard dressing. I raised the plastic fork to my mouth and took a slow, deliberate bite. I chewed, savoring the tangy flavor. I swallowed. "Your brother," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent patio. "Your problem." I dropped the plastic fork into a nearby trash bin. David let out a choked, gasping sound. He could not face the dozens of relatives staring at him with undisguised disgust. He could not look at his brother, who now understood the full extent of the betrayal. He turned on his heel and bolted. He ran through the wooden gate, sprinting down the paved driveway, leaving his family to burn in the fire he ignited. I did not chase him. I pulled my smartphone from my coat pocket and requested a premium rideshare. I waited on the curb in the freezing autumn wind until a black luxury sedan arrived. I climbed into the warm leather back seat and instructed the driver to head south, back to Madison. The 2-hour journey passed in a state of profound clarity. I did not shed a single tear. I did not mourn the death of my marriage. I reviewed the strategic roadmap formulating in my mind. The post-nuptial agreement secured my future wealth. The canceled transfers stopped the bleeding. Now I needed to extract the final tumor. I arrived at our suburban colonial house just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long purple shadows across the frosted lawn. I unlocked the heavy oak front door and stepped into the foyer. The hallway was lined with tall cardboard moving boxes. They were stacked neatly against the wainscoting, sealed with thick strips of clear packing tape. David stood leaning against the archway leading into the kitchen. He held a bottle of imported beer in his hand. He had clearly rushed home to establish a defensive perimeter. A smug, arrogant grin twisted his features. He surveyed the stack of boxes and took a slow, confident sip of his drink. "Giving up so easily?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. He assumed my departure from the barbecue signaled a total surrender. He believed the postnuptial agreement protected his right to live in the marital home, while I retreated in defeat. "Running back to your mother in Door County. I suppose you can hire movers for the rest of the furniture on Monday. Leave the keys on the marble island before you go." I unbuttoned my wool coat, hanging it carefully on the brass hook by the door. I smoothed the fabric of my sweater. I offered him that same serene smile I wore at the steakhouse. "I am not moving anywhere, David," I replied, my voice echoing lightly in the cavernous hallway. "I packed these while you were asleep last night. You should check the labels. Those are your golf shirts." Monday arrived with a bitter frost. The weekend standoff had ended in a hollow stalemate. David refused to acknowledge the cardboard boxes stacked in the foyer. He slept in the guest bedroom, clinging to a desperate delusion that he could still salvage his fabricated kingdom. He woke up before dawn, ironed his best navy suit, and drove to his marketing agency, hoping the familiar corporate environment would restore his shattered authority. He sat inside his corner office on the 12th floor, overlooking the gray Madison skyline. His smartphone buzzed relentlessly on his glass desk. The shadow lenders from Chicago were no longer leaving polite voicemails. They were sending text messages detailing the exact legal mechanisms they would use to liquidate his brother's brewery. They gave him until the end of the business day to wire the $1,500 interest payment. David stared at his dual monitors. His breathing grew shallow. His personal bank accounts contained 0 liquid funds. His credit limits were exhausted. He needed cash, and he needed it before 5 o'clock. He possessed one remaining source of capital. He opened the internal accounting portal for his marketing firm. As a mid-level manager, he held authorization to approve external vendor invoices up to $5,000 without requiring a secondary executive signature. It was a procedural loophole designed to streamline small promotional campaigns. He had never abused the system before, but sheer panic has a unique way of eroding moral boundaries. His fingers hovered over the mechanical keyboard. He clicked the icon to generate a new payee profile. He typed the name Hop and Anchor Branding. Under the service description, he inputted regional market analysis and promotional consulting. He fabricated a fake invoice number, generating a digital document that looked authentic at a passing glance. He requested an expedited direct deposit into the commercial holding ledger he controlled. He entered the amount as $4,800. He calculated that sum would cover the shadow lenders and pay his mother's delinquent condo fees. He hit submit. For exactly 47 minutes, David believed he had outsmarted the universe. He walked to the break room, poured himself a cup of premium roasted coffee, and chatted with a junior copywriter about an upcoming product launch. He projected the aura of a relaxed, successful executive handling his Monday morning routine. Then his desk phone rang. The caller ID displayed the extension for the Human Resources Department. A crisp, administrative voice instructed him to report to Conference Room B on the top floor immediately. David walked into the glass-walled meeting space. The chief financial officer and the director of human resources sat waiting for him. They did not offer him a chair. They did not engage in polite introductory banter. The financial officer slid a printed copy of the Hop and Anchor invoice across the polished mahogany table. "We run an automated compliance sweep on all expedited disbursements," the officer stated, his tone devoid of any warmth. "The routing number attached to this new vendor profile flagged an exact match in our system. It shares the identical destination code as your personal payroll direct deposit. Care to explain why you are attempting to route corporate funds into an external account you personally control?" The coffee in David's stomach turned to pure acid. He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. The polished marketing manager persona disintegrated under the harsh fluorescent lights. He was not a criminal mastermind. He was a cornered, frantic man who made a sloppy, fatal error. "You are suspended effective today," the Human Resources Director announced. "We are confiscating your corporate laptop, your security badge, and your company phone. A full internal audit is launching this afternoon. If we discover any further financial irregularities, we will involve law enforcement. Security will escort you to the elevator now." The walk of shame through the open plan office felt like a funeral march. Dozens of his colleagues watched in stunned silence as the uniformed guard marched David toward the exit. He carried his personal belongings in a small cardboard box. He stepped out onto the freezing pavement, a man stripped of his career, his income, and his dignity, all before the lunch hour. I stood in the center of my spacious kitchen, buttoning my tailored trench coat. I had a lunch meeting scheduled with a prospective healthcare client. The house felt serene. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway provided a soothing, rhythmic soundtrack to the quiet afternoon. The front door burst open, hitting the wall stop with a loud wooden thud. David stormed into the foyer. His navy suit jacket was wrinkled. His tie hung loose around his neck. He dropped a small cardboard box onto the floor, spilling a handful of pens and a framed desk photo onto the hardwood. His face was contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He marched toward the kitchen, his dress shoes pounding a heavy, chaotic rhythm. He pointed a trembling finger at my chest. "Are you happy now?" he screamed, his voice echoing off the subway tile backsplash. "Are you satisfied, Ariana? I just lost my job. I lost my entire career. HR suspended me pending an investigation. They treated me like a common thief in front of the whole agency." I picked up my leather handbag from the Marble Island. I slipped the strap over my shoulder, adjusting the gold hardware. I did not flinch at his raised voice. "What happened at your office, David?" I asked, keeping my tone conversational and light. "Do not play coy with me," he spat, pacing in front of the refrigerator. "I had to secure emergency funding to cover the brewery debt. I had to push a vendor payment through the corporate portal because you froze my access to our family resources. The compliance software caught the routing numbers. They think I am embezzling. My reputation in this industry is ruined." I paused, analyzing his statement. He truly believed his own distorted narrative. He possessed an entitlement so profound it warped his perception of basic reality. You submitted a fraudulent invoice to your employer, I summarized, clarifying the timeline. You attempted to steal corporate funds to pay a shadow lender, and you got caught by a routine accounting sweep. Because you left me no choice, he yelled, slamming his palm against the stone countertop. You backed me into a corner. If you had just transferred the $1,500, none of this would have happened. You forced me to take desperate measures. This is your fault. I walked around the island, closing the physical distance between us. He stopped pacing, breathing heavily, his chest heaving with misplaced righteous indignation. I looked into his eyes, seeing the terrified little boy hiding behind the loud, erratic behavior. I forced you to do nothing, I replied, my voice dropping to a quiet, chilling register. I did not log into your accounting portal. I did not fabricate a fake invoice. I did not steal corporate capital. You made those choices, David. Your entitlement built this trap. You truly believed you deserved my wealth. When the vault closed, you decided you deserved your employer's wealth instead. He opened his mouth to shout another excuse, but the undeniable truth of my words robbed him of his breath. He realized I was not going to absorb his guilt. I was not going to play the role of the nurturing wife, soothing his bruised ego after a long day of making terrible decisions. The stakes are no longer about marital spite. I continued, stepping past him toward the hallway. You crossed a line into severe legal jeopardy. You forged my signature on a commercial loan document, and now you face an internal audit for workplace theft. You are a walking liability. I cannot afford to share a surname with a man destined for a courtroom. I reached into the exterior pocket of my trench coat. I pulled out a thick, crisp white envelope. It did not contain a short-term bridge loan. It did not hold a check to save his mother's condo or his brother's sinking business. I held it out. David stared at the unbending paper. He reached out with shaking fingers, taking the envelope from my hand. He flipped it over, breaking the seal. He pulled out the bound document, unfolding the thick pages. He read the bold black text printed across the top header. Petition for dissolution of marriage. He looked up from the divorce papers, his eyes wide with hollow devastation. I walked past him, leaving him standing alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the shattered ruins of the life he threw away. I opened the front door, stepped out into the crisp autumn sunlight, and walked toward my car without looking back. The polished mahogany table in the downtown legal suite stretched long and imposing. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the state capitol dome. I sat quietly beside my retained litigator, a formidable woman named Evelyn, who possessed the icy demeanor of a seasoned chess grandmaster. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer and organized a stack of manila folders with precise, calculated movements. We were waiting for the opposition to arrive. David hired a notoriously sleazy practitioner named Richard Sterling. Sterling ran sensationalized television advertisements broadcasting loud promises of crushing divorce settlements. He catered to bitter spouses seeking unearned payouts. When the conference room door swung open, my estranged husband strutted inside, projecting a fabricated aura of confidence. Sterling followed closely behind, carrying a scuffed leather briefcase. The lawyer wore a flashy pinstripe suit that appeared expensive from a distance, but revealed cheap stitching up close. David took a seat across from me. He smirked, adjusting his silk tie. He clearly believed the justice system would validate his victim complex. In his distorted reality, he was a dedicated partner who sacrificed his own professional trajectory to support a demanding corporate wife. He assumed his recent suspension from the marketing agency would play perfectly into a narrative of profound emotional distress caused by my sudden cruelty. Sterling did not bother with professional pleasantries. He opened his briefcase, dumping a messy pile of unorganized documents onto the polished wood. He leaned forward, attempting to dominate the physical space. "Let us skip the pleasantries," Counsel Sterling began, directing his booming voice toward Evelyn. "My client endured severe psychological abuse. He lost his lucrative marketing position due to the hostile domestic environment your client created. We are seeking a permanent spousal maintenance order. Furthermore, we demand a clean 50% division of all vested corporate stock options accumulated during the marital timeline. David functioned as the foundational rock, allowing Ariana to thrive in her tech career. He deserves his rightful half of that enterprise. I maintained my steady breathing. I did not betray a single hint of amusement. David sat up straighter, inflating his chest, absorbing the ridiculous praise. He truly thought this loud, obnoxious attorney could bully my legal team into surrendering millions of dollars. Evelyn did not interrupt the blustering speech. She let Sterling exhaust his abrasive vocabulary. When the room fell silent, my litigator calmly picked up a thin document bound by a single metal clip. She slid it smoothly across the mahogany expanse. "What is this?" Sterling scoffed, picking up the crisp white pages. "That is a legally binding postnuptial agreement," Evelyn replied, her tone devoid of any inflection. "Your client executed that contract inside a licensed therapist's office just last week. I draw your attention to paragraph 4 on the 3rd page." Sterling flipped through the document, his thick eyebrows furrowed together. The booming bravado evaporated from his posture. His eyes scanned the dense legal text, reading the exact clause David had blindly signed while trying to play the accommodating victim. The paragraph explicitly waived any and all claims to my medical software equity, past, present, and future. Sterling slowly turned his head, glaring at David. "Did you sign this?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. David swallowed his Adam's apple, bobbing nervously. "Yes, but I was under duress. She tricked me during a counseling session. It cannot possibly be enforceable in a court of law." Evelyn folded her hands together, resting them on the table. "It is entirely enforceable, Mr. Mason. You signed it in the presence of a mandated reporter without any threat of coercion. You voluntarily surrendered your right to her corporate assets. You hold zero equity." The color drained from David's cheeks. The smug satisfaction vanished, replaced by the familiar panicked pallor I recognized from our kitchen confrontation. He looked at his flashy lawyer, expecting a robust defense, but Sterling remained silent, furious that his client had concealed a fatal contract. Before the opposing counsel could formulate a pivot, Evelyn delivered the finishing blow. She reached for the thickest folder in her organized stack. It contained the forensic accounting ledger compiled by Silas. She extracted a summary report, handing copies to both men across the table. "Since we are discussing financial entitlements," Evelyn continued, "we must address the concept of marital waste under state law. Mr. Mason, we possess undeniable proof that you systematically funneled marital funds to a failing commercial enterprise in Green Bay. You diverted hundreds of thousands of dollars without your spouse's knowledge or consent." Sterling skimmed the forensic summary. His breathing grew shallow. "This is just a family loan," he argued weakly, attempting to salvage a dying case. "It is far more sinister than a simple loan," Evelyn countered. She produced a final piece of evidence, sliding a high-resolution photocopy toward the center of the table. "That is a commercial lending agreement securing a private business debt. Please note the guarantor's signature at the bottom. My client did not sign that document. Your client committed forgery. He fraudulently leveraged my client's restricted stock portfolio to guarantee a toxic note." The air in the conference room turned heavy and suffocating. Sterling dropped the paper as if it were radioactive. He understood the severity of the situation instantly. A judge would not award alimony to a spouse caught committing federal wire fraud and systemic theft. "Under the marital waste statute," Evelyn stated, her voice ringing with finality, "your client is not entitled to a single penny of maintenance. In fact, the law dictates he must reimburse my client for half of the squandered capital. He owes Ariana over $120,000. David shrank back into his leather chair, a defeated, broken shell of a man. His flashy attorney packed his scuffed briefcase with frantic, chaotic movements. Sterling glared at his own client, radiating pure disgust. "You lied to me, you idiot," the lawyer hissed under his breath. I cannot represent a felony liability. You are entirely on your own." Sterling marched out of the room, leaving David stranded in the silent legal suite. I watched my estranged husband stare blankly at the mahogany grain, outgunned, outmaneuvered, and utterly destroyed by his own hubris. The divorce battlefield was conquered, but the war was far from over. Just as David lowered his head into his trembling hands, his smartphone illuminated on the table. The screen displayed a frantic text message preview from his sister Jessica. Patricia was hysterical. The luxury condo board had moved past mere warnings and initiated a devastating formal eviction action, threatening to rip the last remaining shred of their false reality into pieces. I returned to my quiet suburban colonial, arriving just as the pale winter sun began its descent behind the naked oak trees lining the street. The confrontation in the downtown legal suite left me feeling strangely energized. The air inside my house felt lighter, devoid of the oppressive tension David generated simply by walking into a room. I unbuttoned my tailored trench coat, draping it over the banister. I walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of sparkling water, dropping a single slice of lemon into the crystal tumbler. I stood by the marble island, enjoying the profound silence of a home no longer occupied by a parasite. My smartphone disrupted the tranquility, vibrating against the stone countertop. The screen illuminated, displaying an incoming call from Patricia. I watched the device rattle for several seconds, studying the glowing letters. A week ago, she stormed into this very room, radiating righteous indignation, demanding I fix her fabricated banking glitch. She stood on my hardwood floors and treated me like a disobedient subordinate. Today, the digital summons carried a much different vibration. The arrogance had run out of fuel. I swiped the green icon, lifting the speaker to my ear. I did not offer a polite greeting. Ariana Patricia sobbed, her voice a wet, ragged gasp. "Oh, thank God you answered your phone. Please, you have to listen to me." I leaned against the cool counter, taking a slow sip of my water. "I am listening, Patricia," I replied, my tone flat and clinical. She wept with a total lack of restraint. The haughty, matriarchal facade had shattered, leaving behind a terrified senior citizen facing the harsh reality of systemic poverty. "They posted a notice on my door," she cried, hyperventilating between syllables. "The actual bank sent a process server." It is not just the property management group anymore. The primary mortgage lender initiated formal pre-foreclosure proceedings. They are giving me 30 days to vacate the premises before the sheriff's department physically removes my belongings and changes the locks. The glass tower she loved so dearly was actively rejecting her. Her pristine reputation among her wealthy Milwaukee neighbors was effectively dead. The bridge club friends she spent years trying to impress would soon watch her carry cardboard boxes into a moving van. "David will not answer my calls," Patricia continued, her panic escalating into raw hysteria. "Jessica is crying in the guest bedroom because her auto lender repossessed the SUV from the parking garage this morning. We have nowhere to go. Ariana, you cannot let them throw me out onto the street. I am an old woman. We are family. You have to remember family loyalty. Please, just wire the arrears to the bank. I will do anything you ask. I will apologize for everything. Just save my home." She begged, utilizing the exact phrase her son had weaponized for years: family loyalty. It was a fascinating concept. In their minds, loyalty only flowed in one direction. It was a one-way pipeline designed to siphon my wealth to sustain their comfort, while demanding my silent obedience in return. I closed my eyes, summoning the specific memory from Rare Steakhouse just a few short weeks ago. I pictured Patricia sitting in that dim corner booth, wearing the expensive cashmere wrap I purchased for her. I remembered the exact angle of her jaw as she took a slow, deliberate sip of her Napa Valley Cabernet. I remembered the unmistakable smirk playing on her lips when David coldly dismissed my own mother's escalating dementia. She delighted in watching me get put in my place. She enjoyed the cruelty of that moment. I opened my eyes, focusing on the bare winter branches swaying outside the kitchen window. "Patricia," I said, keeping my pitch steady and unhurried, "do Do you remember our dinner at the steakhouse last month? A sharp silence stretched across the cellular connection. She hiccuped, a sound of genuine dread catching in her throat. Yes, she whispered. Do you remember the rule David established while you sat there and smiled? I asked, letting the question hang in the air like a blade. Ariana, please, she begged again, her voice breaking into a pathetic whine. That was a mistake. We were wrong. We did not mean it. You were arrogant, I corrected her, and arrogance carries a very specific price tag. I am merely honoring the boundaries your son set and you endorsed. Your housing, your problem. I lowered the phone and tapped the red disconnect button, terminating the call. I did not block her number. I wanted her to sit with the crushing silence. I wanted her to feel the exact hollow desperation I felt when I thought I could not afford to keep my mother safe from cognitive decline. There was, however, one final piece of business remaining on the calendar for that specific day. Today was Patricia's milestone birthday. David had explicitly ordered me to purchase a maroon leather tote bag from a high-end downtown boutique to honor the occasion. I had promised him I would acquire a beautiful designer presentation box. I kept my promises. Earlier that morning, I hired a private courier service to deliver that exact, pristine, glossy package to the concierge desk at Patricia's building. I knew the desk attendant would hold it and notify her of a luxury delivery. I also knew that in her current state of profound despair, Patricia would seek out any shred of comfort. She would retrieve that heavy box, assuming her golden child had somehow managed to salvage her special day with an expensive token of affection. I imagined the scene unfolding across town in her upscale apartment. I pictured Patricia and Jessica sitting on the edge of the velvet sofa, their eyes red and swollen from crying over the lost vehicle and the foreclosure notice. I envisioned Patricia untying the gold satin ribbon with trembling fingers, pulling back the layers of branded tissue paper, hoping the scent of rich Italian leather would momentarily mask the stench of her impending eviction. Instead, her hands would find a thick stack of unbending legal paper. During the weekend, while David scrambled to cover his tracks and fabricate corporate invoices, I instructed Evelyn to execute a ruthless financial maneuver. My private trust held vast reserves of liquid capital generated from years of software commissions. The shadow lenders in Chicago were impatient and eager to offload a toxic, defaulting commercial note. They did not care who paid them, as long as the ledger balanced. Evelyn contacted the lending firm and negotiated a direct purchase of the Hop and Anchor debt for a fraction of its original value. I bought the paper. I owned the loan. The document resting inside that designer birthday box was not a gift receipt. It was a formal notification of debt transfer and an immediate legal demand for repayment in full. It informed Patricia that my trust was now the primary creditor holding the collateral on Bradley's failing brewery. It detailed my intention to call the note and initiate the seizure of the commercial property located in Green Bay. By delivering the notice to Patricia, I ensured the entire family understood the architecture of their ruin. David forged my signature to secure the initial loan. Bradley risked his livelihood to build the doomed business. Patricia coached her son on how to steal the payments from my payroll account. Now I owned the dirt beneath their feet. The unearned entitlement that fueled their existence was extinguished, leaving nothing but ashes. I finished my glass of sparkling water, setting the crystal tumbler into the stainless steel sink. The war was nearing its definitive conclusion, but David still harbored one final pathetic delusion. He believed the impending divorce settlement would force the liquidation of our shared real estate assets. He assumed he could demand a substantial buyout for his half of our pristine Wisconsin lake house, using the windfall to pay his legal fees and avoid federal prison. He planned to walk into our final mediation session wearing a smug, misplaced grin, ready to play his ultimate trump card. He had no idea the deck was missing entirely. The stark white walls of the downtown mediation center offered zero warmth against the bitter Wisconsin winter raging outside the frosted windows. I sat beside Evelyn, my litigator, in a room devoid of any decorative distractions. The long rectangular table consisted of polished glass and cold steel. The environment matched the exact temperature of my current emotional state. David arrived 15 minutes late. He looked entirely different from the polished, arrogant executive who ordered expensive wine at the steakhouse just weeks ago. His navy suit hung loosely on his frame, suggesting he had lost significant weight. Dark purple circles stained the delicate skin beneath his eyes. He possessed the frantic, hunted energy of an animal backed into a dark corner. Following his disastrous previous legal consultation, he had managed to secure new representation. His new attorney introduced himself as Gregory. Gregory wore a wrinkled gray suit and carried a plastic briefcase. He clearly operated at the bottom of the legal barrel, taking on desperate clients who could not afford premium retainer fees. Despite his cheap appearance, Gregory projected an unearned smugness. He puffed his chest out, organizing a thin stack of generic legal pads on the glass table. David firmly believed he still held one final ace up his sleeve. He knew the postnuptial agreement stripped him of my corporate equity. He understood his documented theft eliminated his chance at spousal support. But his distorted ego clung to a singular remaining asset. 5 years ago, I purchased a beautiful Cedar Lake house in northern Wisconsin. The property featured a private dock, deep water access, and towering pine trees. It was a serene sanctuary away from the demanding corporate tech world. David spent countless weekends there, hosting his friends, playing the role of the wealthy real estate baron. Because the home was acquired during our marital timeline, he automatically assumed it qualified as joint community property. He calculated the current market value and determined his theoretical 50% share would yield a substantial 7-figure cash payout. In his desperate mind, that anticipated cash buyout represented his salvation. He planned to use those funds to pay off the commercial shadow lenders, to cover his mother's delinquent condo fees, and hire a criminal defense attorney to handle his workplace embezzlement charges. He thought the lake house was his golden ticket to freedom. Gregory cleared his throat, tapping a cheap ballpoint pen against his legal pad. "We are prepared to offer a clean, expedited settlement," he announced, directing his words toward Evelyn. "My client acknowledges the validity of the postnuptial contract regarding the medical software portfolio. We are willing to walk away from the corporate assets entirely. However, we must address the joint real estate holdings." Evelyn remained perfectly still. She rested her hands on her lap, projecting an aura of absolute stillness. "Please continue, counselor," she murmured. "The primary marital asset is the Northern Lake property," Gregory stated, flipping to a handwritten page. "The current market appraisal places the estate at $2.4 million. My client is entitled to half of that equity. We are demanding a cash buyout of $1.2 million. Upon receipt of those funds, David will sign the final dissolution decree today, ending this matter without a protracted trial." David leaned forward, resting his elbows on the glass table. He offered me a faint, trembling smirk. It was a pathetic attempt to project dominance. He truly believed he had outmaneuvered me. He thought he could extract over $1 million from my bank account to finance his escape from the consequences he engineered. Evelyn did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She allowed the silence in the room to stretch out for several agonizing seconds. The pacing of the entire negotiation slowed to a glacial crawl. The quiet hum of the overhead ventilation system became the loudest sound in the room. I took a slow sip of bottled water, savoring the crisp, cold liquid. I watched the confident posture slowly drain out of Gregory as the silence lengthened. Attorneys despise empty air. It makes them nervous. When the tension reached an unbearable peak, Evelyn reached into her pristine leather portfolio. She did not produce a counteroffer. She did not pull out a property deed. She retrieved a thin stack of documents bearing the official watermark of a major federal banking institution. She slid the papers across the smooth glass. They glided silently, coming to a rest directly in front of Gregory. "We will not be discussing real estate buyouts today," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a chilling monotone register. "We are here to discuss the immediate legal reality your client faces." Gregory frowned, picking up the top document. "What is this?" he asked, his smugness faltering. "That is an official fraud incident report. Evelyn explained. As we established during previous disclosures, your client forged my client's signature to leverage her restricted stock portfolio, securing a commercial loan for his brother's brewery. Gregory swallowed hard, casting a nervous, sideways glance at David. You already claimed marital waste based on that allegation. We are prepared to dispute the signature validity in civil court. We are no longer operating in civil court, Evelyn corrected him, leaning forward slightly. My client is the primary account holder of that stock portfolio. Upon discovering the unauthorized collateral pledge, she fulfilled her legal obligation. She formally notified the financial institution that her signature was fabricated. David stopped breathing. His hands clamped onto the edge of the glass table, his knuckles turning bone white. The Banking Compliance Division conducted an immediate internal review. Evelyn continued delivering each word like a measured hammer strike. They verified the digital forgery. Because the loan crossed state lines, originating from a shadow lender in Chicago, the bank escalated the matter. They filed a formal criminal complaint with the federal authorities. The Federal Bureau of Investigation Field Office in Milwaukee currently holds the open dossier. The blood vanished from David's face. His mouth opened, but his vocal cords failed to produce a single sound. He stared at the watermarked papers trapped in a nightmare he could not wake up from. Furthermore, Evelyn stated the original shadow lenders received the official fraud notification yesterday morning. Under the terms of their commercial lending agreement, any fraudulent activity triggers an immediate default and acceleration clause. They are calling the note. The entire balance is due today. They are moving to seize the brewery property by the end of the business week. The silence that followed was suffocating. It was heavy and dense, pressing down on David, forcing the air from his lungs. There was no escape hatch. There was no clever accounting trick left to play. He had tried to steal his way out of debt and merely expedited his own destruction. Gregory stared at the federal reporting documents. His eyes scanned the severe legal terminology detailing wire fraud, identity theft, and bank fraud. He realized in a matter of seconds that his client had lied to him, concealing a staggering level of criminal exposure. He was sitting next to a man destined for a federal penitentiary. The cheap ballpoint pen slipped from Gregory's fingers. It hit the glass table with a sharp, definitive clatter. The sound echoed in the sterile room, marking the exact moment the final delusion shattered. Gregory slowly pushed his chair back away from the table, away from David. He looked at Evelyn, his face pale and slick with sudden sweat. I need a recess, he whispered, his voice trembling. There are no recesses left, I said, speaking for the first time since we entered the room. My voice sounded calm, floating above the wreckage. You have run out of time, David. He looked at me, his eyes wide and hollow. The arrogant patriarch, the wealthy kingmaker, the entitled son, they were all dead. Only a terrified criminal remained, waiting for the inevitable arrival of law enforcement. But he still did not realize the true depth of the trap I had built. He still thought the lake house belonged to him. He still thought he held one tiny sliver of leverage. He was about to learn that my legal strategy was far more ruthless than he could ever comprehend. Gregory sat paralyzed, staring at the watermarked federal documents resting on the glass table. He pushed his chair backward, the metal legs scraping harshly against the polished floor. The cheap attorney wanted to be anywhere else in the world except sitting next to a man actively targeted by a federal financial task force. He closed his plastic briefcase, the latches snapping shut with a loud, definitive click. David ignored his fleeing lawyer. His chest heaved in rapid, erratic spasms. He grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles turning a stark bone white. His eyes darted around the sterile room, searching for a hidden exit, a secret loophole, a magical reset button that could undo the catastrophic damage he had inflicted upon his own life. But the lake house. David stammered, his voice a frantic, wet gasp. We own the Northern Lake House. It is worth over $2 million. I am entitled to my equity under state marital laws. We can list the property tomorrow. We can sell the estate and use the proceeds to pay off the bank. We can settle the commercial debt and make the fraud investigation disappear. You do not have to do this, Ariana. We have the capital to fix this right now. Evelyn looked at him with an expression of profound clinical pity. She did not reach for another folder. She simply folded her hands together. You do not own a single wooden plank of that property, Mr. Mason, she stated, her tone dropping to a quiet, chilling register. You never did. David blinked, his face contorting in sheer confusion. My name is on the marital tax returns, he argued desperately. I helped pick out the custom cedar siding. I hosted corporate retreats on that patio. It is joint community property. It is an isolated asset, Evelyn corrected him. 5 years ago, when the estate was purchased, my client utilized funds originating entirely from a premarital inheritance left by her late grandmother. The capital was never commingled with your joint savings. Furthermore, the deed was never recorded in your name or even her personal name. The property is legally owned by a blind, limited liability company controlled exclusively by a private trust. Evelyn allowed the legal reality to settle over the room before delivering the final strike. You hold zero claim to that real estate. You cannot force a sale. You cannot extract a single penny of equity. You are entirely destitute. The last fragile pillar supporting his fabricated kingdom crumbled into dust. The delusion he harbored, the arrogant belief that he could extract $1 million payout to finance his escape, evaporated instantly. He possessed no assets. He carried hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen debt. He faced imminent federal prosecution for wire fraud. His career was over. His family was facing eviction and bankruptcy. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cold glass surface. I looked directly into his bloodshot eyes. For 6 years, he treated me like an invisible utility. He assumed my silence equated to weakness. He mistook my patience for compliance. I am going to offer you a choice, David, I said, my voice carrying across the silent room. It is the final choice you will ever make regarding my wealth. He swallowed hard, unable to break eye contact. A solitary drop of sweat traced a path down his pale temple. As Evelyn informed you, the primary commercial note on the brewery is in default, I explained, keeping my pitch steady and melodic. The shadow lenders in Chicago called the debt. What Evelyn did not mention is the current ownership of that toxic paper. I purchased the note. My private trust is now the sole creditor holding the collateral on your brother's business. David's mouth parted slightly. The magnitude of my strategic maneuvering washed over him. I did not just freeze his allowance. I bought the battlefield. I hold the power to dictate the next sequence of events, I continued. I can cooperate fully with the federal authorities. I can provide the original forged documents, testify in open court, and watch a federal judge sentence you to a minimum of 10 years in a penitentiary. You will lose your freedom, and your family will still lose everything they own. I paused, letting the threat of a concrete prison cell suffocate his remaining pride. Or I offered lowering my voice to a whisper, "You can accept my settlement." "Tell me what you want," he pleaded, his voice cracking. He abandoned every shred of his former arrogance. He was begging, a hollow shell of a man, terrified of the consequences he engineered. "Just tell me what to do." "I will decline to press civil charges," I outlined. "I will sign a sworn affidavit withdrawing my victim impact complaint regarding the forgery. Without a cooperating key witness, the federal prosecutor will likely drop the wire fraud investigation due to insufficient evidence. I will keep you out of a federal prison cell." Gregory stopped packing his briefcase. He froze, listening to the terms of salvation. "In exchange," I stated, tapping my index finger against the glass table, "you will sign the final dissolution decree today. You will legally surrender any and all claims to alimony, maintenance, and marital assets. You will walk away from this marriage with nothing but the clothes on your back. I will sign it." David agreed instantly, nodding his head in rapid, frantic motions. "I will sign whatever you want. Give me the pen." I held up my hand, stopping his desperate compliance. "There is one final condition." David froze, his eyes wide with impending dread. Your brother Bradley pledged the physical deed to the Green Bay Brewery as collateral for the forged loan, I explained. Since the note is in default, I have the legal right to initiate a lengthy commercial foreclosure. I do not want to spend months in litigation. You are going to call Bradley right now. You are going to force him to sign the deed over to my holding company today in lieu of foreclosure. You will convince him to surrender the property quietly. David stared at me horrified. Ariana, that brewery is his entire life. He poured his life savings into those fermentation tanks. If he signs the deed over, he loses his business and his income. He has a wife and children. You are asking me to destroy my own brother. I'm asking you to pay your debts, I corrected him. You stole my money to fund his failing venture. Now I am collecting the collateral. You can force him to sign the deed today, or you can call a bail bondsman tomorrow. The choice belongs entirely to you. The moral dilemma hung in the sterile air. David built his entire identity around the concept of family loyalty. He demanded I fund his mother's luxury lifestyle. He insisted I subsidize his sister's car. He preached the gospel of blood over everything. But when forced to choose between his brother's livelihood and his own freedom, the decision took less than 10 seconds. He reached into his pocket with trembling fingers and retrieved his smartphone. He unlocked the screen and navigated to his contacts. He placed the device on the glass table and engaged the speakerphone. The line rang 3 times before Bradley answered. The background noise of the taproom hummed faintly through the digital speaker. David Bradley said, his voice thick with exhaustion and lingering anger. Have you fixed the banking issue yet? The collection agents left another warning on the door this morning. David closed his eyes, a tear leaking from the corner of his lashes. He betrayed his own flesh and blood with a single breath. Brad, listen to me, David choked out, his voice sounding weak and pathetic. You have to surrender the building. You have to sign the deed over to the creditors today. What are you talking about? Bradley shouted, the panic instantly returning to his tone. You promised you would secure emergency funding. You told me the routing numbers were scrambled. You said you had the capital. I lied, David whispered, staring down at the polished glass. I do not have the money. I never had the money. The creditors bought the note and they are calling the debt. If you do not sign the deed over in lieu of foreclosure, they are going to press criminal charges against me for securing the loan under false pretenses. They will send me to prison, Brad. You have to sign the papers to keep me out of jail. A heavy, devastating silence radiated from the speakerphone. Bradley realized his younger brother had not just failed him. David had actively sabotaged his entire existence to maintain a shallow facade. The Golden Child was nothing more than a coward, passing the consequences of his crimes onto his family. Send the documents, Bradley replied, his voice dead and hollow. I will sign them. Do not ever contact me or my family again. The line went dead. David dropped his head onto the table, weeping into his folded arms. He had saved himself from a federal indictment, but he had amputated his own soul in the process. His family would never forgive him. He was permanently exiled from the bloodline he claimed to cherish. Evelyn slid a stack of settlement contracts across the table. They included the final divorce decree, the asset waiver, and the commercial deed transfer forms for the Green Bay property. David did not read a single paragraph. He picked up the cheap plastic pen his lawyer abandoned and signed his name on every dotted line. I gathered the executed documents, placing them safely into my leather portfolio. The breathtaking scope of the victory settled into my bones. I had weaponized David's own fraudulent desperation. I used his terror of a prison cell to legally seize his family's only remaining asset for pennies on the dollar. The failing brewery, the land it sat on, the commercial equipment inside it, all belonged to me now. I stood up from the cold glass table. I looked down at the man, sobbing quietly into his tailored sleeves. He told me my money was mine. I merely followed his rules until the very end. 6 months passed. The bitter winter frost melted into a bright, crisp Wisconsin spring. The ice on Lake Michigan fractured and dissolved, reflecting the clear blue sky. I sat on a wooden bench in Door County, holding a cup of warm herbal tea. Next to me, my mother rested a canvas on a sturdy wooden easel. She held a brush dipped in cerulean blue, painting the water. She did not remember my name today, but she smiled when the breeze touched her face. She was safe. The memory care facility provided a serene, structured environment. Her dignity was protected by an ironclad trust fund. The nightmare of losing her to the cold mechanics of poverty was permanently erased. I left the facility and walked to my car, mapping a route toward Green Bay. As the tires hummed against the asphalt, my mind drifted toward the architectural ruins of the Mason family. The dust had finally settled over their shattered kingdom. David did not secure a miraculous corporate comeback. The human resources investigation at his marketing agency yielded irrefutable proof of his fabricated vendor invoices. He avoided a lengthy federal trial for the commercial wire fraud because I honored my end of our ruthless bargain, withdrawing the primary complaint. However, local prosecutors pursued the workplace theft. David accepted a humiliating plea agreement to escape a state penitentiary sentence. He pleaded guilty to misdemeanor embezzlement. The conviction permanently revoked his ability to work in any financial or managerial capacity. The polished executive was dead. The fallout swept through his bloodline with equal severity. Without my automated payroll deposits funding their illusions, they crashed into the harsh pavement of their actual socioeconomic bracket. Patricia lost her eviction battle. She surrendered the keys to her luxury high-rise condo, packing her designer clothing into cheap cardboard boxes. She relocated to a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a decaying suburban complex on the outskirts of town. The air in her new home constantly smelled of stale cooking oil and damp carpets. There were no concierge desks or heated indoor pools. She spent her days sitting on a worn polyester sofa, watching basic television, refusing to speak to the women from her former bridge club. Jessica endured a similar descent. The auto finance company repossessed her pristine white vehicle. She could no longer play the role of the careless socialite. Every morning she walked 4 blocks to a concrete bus shelter. She stood in the freezing rain and the biting wind, waiting for public transit to transport her to the retail job she despised. She lived in the tiny second bedroom of her mother's dreary apartment. David occupied a folding cot in the living room. The 3 of them were trapped together in a suffocating cage built entirely by their own entitlement. Their unearned arrogance had mutated into a toxic, bitter resentment. They blamed each other for the collapse, tearing their familial bonds into unrecognizable shreds. I navigated the winding streets of Green Bay, pulling into a familiar paved lot. 6 months ago, this property housed a failing craft brewery. It smelled of stale beer, charred pork, and desperation. Today, the exterior boasted a fresh coat of stark white paint and modern black trim. I parked my vehicle and stepped through the double glass doors. The transformation inside was breathtaking. I did not lease the space to another failing entrepreneur. I gutted the interior, exposing the original brick walls and the high timber ceilings. Sunlight poured through large industrial skylights, illuminating a vibrant, open-concept floor plan. This was no longer a monument to male ego and bad business decisions. It served as the central headquarters for a newly established nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting victims of financial abuse. I used a fraction of my tech industry commissions to fund the enterprise. Dozens of women sat around polished oak tables, working on laptops, reviewing credit reports, and learning how to untangle their identities from predatory spouses. We transformed the old taproom into a legal aid clinic where volunteer attorneys helped clients draft separation agreements and secure their assets. The air smelled of fresh roasted coffee and lavender. I walked past the conference rooms, listening to the steady murmur of empowerment and education. I turned a toxic liability into a sanctuary. I weaponized the real estate David stole from me, transforming it into a fortress that would prevent other women from enduring the same silent subjugation. The poetic irony provided a deep, enduring warmth inside my chest. I spent the afternoon reviewing operational budgets with the nonprofit director. When the meeting concluded, I returned to my car and plotted a course south toward Milwaukee. I had one final personal errand to run before returning to my quiet life in Madison. I navigated the heavy late afternoon traffic, exiting the highway near the upscale downtown district. This was the exact neighborhood where Patricia used to reside. The towering glass condominiums cast long shadows across the pristine sidewalks. High-end boutiques and organic grocers lined the manicured streets. I parked my sedan along the curb, cutting the engine. I rested my hands on the leather steering wheel, watching the scene unfold across the avenue. A large white passenger van sat idling near the corner. A municipal supervisor stood on the pavement holding a clipboard. A crew of 5 men wearing bright neon orange safety vests spread out along the gutter. They carried long metal grabbers and heavy plastic garbage bags. The terms of David's plea agreement mandated 500 hours of supervised community service. The local court assigned him to a municipal beautification detail. They assigned him to clean the gutters in the wealthiest zip code in the city. I watched my former husband drag a black trash bag along the concrete. His tailored navy suits were gone, replaced by stained denim and a heavy canvas jacket. He looked exhausted. His shoulders slumped forward, carrying the physical weight of his ruined ego. The freezing wind whipped across the street, biting at his exposed face. He paused to pick up a discarded fast food wrapper, jamming it into the plastic sack. His hands were raw and covered in dirt, reflecting the manual labor he once believed was beneath him. A group of older, wealthy women exited a nearby boutique holding designer shopping bags. One of them bore a striking resemblance to Eleanor, the condo board president, who handed Patricia her initial eviction notice. The women walked past the sanitation crew, chatting loudly, ignoring the men working in the gutters. David turned his face away, pulling the brim of a faded baseball cap down over his eyes, desperate to hide his identity from the people his mother used to worship. He shrunk into the shadows, a ghost haunting the borders of a kingdom he could never re-enter. I did not roll down my window. I did not honk the horn or shout his name. I required no further confrontation. The score was settled, and the ledger was permanently balanced. I sat in the quiet comfort of my vehicle, observing the sheer mechanics of consequence. He tried to force me into a life of silent servitude. He expected me to fund his illusions while accepting his disrespect. He assumed my wealth belonged to his bloodline simply because he demanded it. I started the engine, feeling the smooth vibration hum through the floorboards. I shifted the transmission into drive. I looked through the windshield, watching him bend down to retrieve another piece of trash from the freezing pavement. He told me my money was mine. I just made sure he paid the exact price of his own words.